Hello and welcome to the new episode of Space Defense and Security Podcast. Today's episode is really special because the guest is not only just my friend, but he's also someone who has served in the latest Indian Air Force related weapon systems, as well as being a strategist for some of the aerial systems. And to start with today's episode, uh, this is something that we haven't really covered so well in the previous episodes. That is the joint warfare reality, how weapons are selected for air land sea integration. I believe we have discussed multi domain warfare systems previously, but really didn't took a deep dive into how this integration works across. Of course, we are leaving the space and the cyber domain for today because integrating those things might uh, basically take the episode length far beyond our usual length. So that's the reason we are sticking to air, land, sea, and integration for today's episode. So without any delay, I would like to basically welcome today's guest. That's Shailesh Pol. Hi, Shailesh. Welcome to the episode.
Hello, good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to this special podcast. It is indeed a matter of privilege for me to present myself here with you, and you have presenting me with a platform to speak on the topic and also express my knowledge and share it with the world. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Shailesh, and giving us your time. I know how you have been busy since you moved out of Indian Air Force, and you have been helping quite a lot of companies in the process. So before we actually take a deep dive into the episode, can you provide us a brief introduction about yourself? Basically, how you ended up doing what you're doing at the moment, also about your flying experience, because that's
Yes.
something our audience will be very much interested to hear as well.
Definitely, definitely. I'll quickly summarize on my previous experience, and I will present you what exactly the expertise that I come with. So to begin with, I had done since my childhood. I had an affection or say aim to join the armed forces, especially become a fighter pilot. So I pursued that, and I joined the National Defense Academy after my education, completing my education up to 12th. And after completion of national training, basic military training at National Defense Academy, I joined the Indian Air Force through first initially basic flying on pilotless aircraft, then fighter training on Kiran Mark 1 Alpha aircraft, and then got commissioned into the fighter stream of the Indian Air Force. I did my basic of flying introduction towards fighter flying. That is the advanced stage of fighter flying. That is on the Hawk Mark 132 aircraft, which is a British aerospace industry built aircraft. And then I was posted to a frontline fighter squadron of MiG 21s. So once I joined the MiG 21s, I was introduced to the training syllabus of on the MiG 21s, and about 6 to 7 years I have been in the MiG 21 squadrons, and I am a fully operational fighter pilot on MiG 21. I have completed all the roles related to fighter flying, and then I further, after completion of 2 tenures and in MiG 21, I moved on to fly the UAVs, that is the Searcher and Heron RPA of Indian Air Force. That was specially in the ISR roles, and additionally support to CI ops and laser designation, weapon delivery related roles, which I was qualified for, and multiple related roles which were part of the operations of the UAVs, which the Israelis concept have introduced. That is, the UAV is at a time flown by the internal pilot as well as external pilot, and there are special payload operators, observers. So I was primarily trained as an internal pilot who generally flies the mission as per requirement of the uh, whatever the mission demands. Additionally, I have also cross trained onto extended roles of being an external pilot and and an observer. And after completion of a good tenure, having 400 hours on UAVs, I moved on to take over command of an frontline IGLA unit, an IGLA missile, which is a surface to air missile of it is a frontline unit of Indian Air Force, which takes air defense. So I'm commanding that unit, and I was looking after the western sector, that is Maharashtra and Gujarat sector, in which I was responsible for air defense of some strategic assets. And after that, before retirement, I had a last tenure wherein I was the operations adjutant. That is, so in civil parlance, we can call it flight operations manager, wherein I was the manager at a very premier fighter base, which had two fighter squadrons, one helicopter squadrons, and say on a daily basis, 50 plus aircraft used to operate. So that role involved management of routine flight operations and also participation in some Air Force level exercises, which included participation of more than 100 plus aircraft. So the experience that I come with is mainly from the aerospace and defense sector. I had also had the privilege to participate in Aero India with one of the countries and assisting them in to go ahead with some purchases of Indian made helicopters from Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. So I was processing the license for them. So I have a fair idea of how the present defense and aerospace domain is working, how it is started growing. So once having got the idea of how the things are growing up, how the scenario is changing, because being on both the sides, now that I have retired and I have come to the corporate side or say the civil side, now I understand both the sides. What are the requirements on the armed forces side, how the warfare scenario is changing, because I was an officer in the Indian Armed Forces, so I have it is obvious that will be a student of geopolitics and the evolving scenario across the world. So with that help, that knowledge of being a student of geopolitics, using that in the civil domain, I understood that what the requirement is going. Now, once my interaction improved, especially related to the UAV domain, with the people outside who are working, my special focus was towards MSMEs and small scale developers who are working, who desperately want to do something, pitch their products, but they are not having a platform, they don't have guidance. So that is where I looked for an opportunity that they that basically in fighter flying parlance, what we call is weapon to target matching. So with the heading, people can understand where we are heading. So this is exactly what I'm trying to do. There are potential people. I'm matching the weapon with the target. The target, what we see, is the huge aerospace and defense domain. So that is how I have landed where I've landed, and I think that's a fair
Yeah,
introduction.
absolutely. Thank you very much for this detailed insight. And I would say a lot of NATO member states actually listen to our podcast episodes,
Definitely,
and
self-image.
I would like to let them know that they can take note of Shailesh right now itself, because of course the ex-armed forces personnel, no matter if it's from India, Australia, Japan, or any part of the world, I think the field experience is something that differentiates individuals and the experts like you in the
Yes,
civil and the corporate domain, because a lot of times the corporates do not know exactly what is needed in terms of supply and demand. People run behind the technology, but they do not understand what is exactly the demand of the armed forces, whether it's Navy, Air Force, or Army. There are, I know some startups who have are working on some laser tech, but the reality is like the armed forces, most of the armed forces do not have that requirement currently. I mean, I'm not saying that the startups are not doing such startups are not doing innovative work. Yes, they're doing innovative work, but I think experts like you are needed into those kind of startups or ecosystem where they can guide the founders on what kind of exact demand is there in the market for specific type of armed forces. So definitely, I think down the line in the conversation, we'll take a deep dive into this.
exactly.
Yeah.
Even I would just provide an instance where I was part of the industrial outreach program conducted by the Ministry of Defense, which was towards Department of Defense Production, which was under this
Yes.
Department of Defense Production. So in this program, I was also participant, and I had the privilege of interacting with lot of small scale and also large scale industrialists who who had the expertise to make something, but they didn't know what to exactly make or what to build. And then I was part of the introduction team where we were introducing armed forces in a basic manner to them. That for
Yeah.
I was trying to explain how armed forces work, what are our systems, may be obsolete, may be advanced, how our SOPs are, and where
Yes.
exactly the help is required. So I was part of that interaction, and I could feel their absence of understanding of what is there on our side. So
Yes.
uh, such experience and insights, my experience would definitely help them to understand where they should be heading and where they
Heading.
should be
Yeah.
developing and what is the exact requirement.
Absolutely. I agree with you on this for sure.
Yes.
So to actually begin with, I mean, yeah, of course, I'm attached to army a lot since the beginning. I think Shailesh will be knowing since we were in our military school days. Everyone was basically scrambling around the National Defense Academy, and I was one of the students, running for army. So army is something that I think in the beginning of the podcast also I think I almost introduced you as an army man, but yeah, but then I realized that you're an Air Force personnel basically. So yeah, I'll start the question with the Air Force because I think that's your main I think domain.
Correct.
So
Yes.
when the Air Force plans to support an Army Strike Corps or Naval Task Force, what fundamentally changes in how weapons are selected compared to purely Air Force led mission from your perspective and your experience?
Okay. So uh, whenever and say even if it is a small scale battle or it is a complete war scenario,
Yeah.
what happens is the first plan of the Air Force is to take control of the air. If even if there is a joint operation, the first primary or fundamental role would be in the beginning is to take control of air. So when I say control of air, as if we go detail in theory, it is very vast, and to understand what are the degrees of control of air, that if I start putting theory, it would it will start becoming difficult. But in a layman term, what I would explain is control of air is basically, if I control the air completely, that is any enemy platform, be it aircraft or a SAM system or any other weapon, will not be you able to threaten our assets in the air by any means. So there would be a possibility where there is partial amount of threat or some amount of threat. Now that degree of control of air would vary, but we definitely aim to first take control of air, because once we achieve the control of air, now we have freedom to operate in that airspace. It is not that always we will be operating on our side of the airspace, or say when war breaks out, there would be no exact demarcation. The international boundary would be dissolved because now we are in a war scenario. Though on paper it would exist, or physically on geographically we would know that this was the existing, but once war has broken out, the armies have started interacting, forces have started moving. Now that international border has dissolved. Now once international border has dissolved, also the airspace boundary has dissolved. Now the combat is progressing, the fight is progressing. So between them, once it is dissolved, the one who controls air, it is a dynamic situation, it is a dynamically existing condition where someone would be having someone's control of air would be extending into the enemy force. Sometimes enemies would be extending in some geographical area in your uh, your airspace. So first plan is to take control of air. In this, we would include destruct specific missions would be planned to destroy enemies' air defense assets, which would also include like bombing of the runways, wherein if our aircraft start operating in there, they would not send their interceptors to threaten our aircraft. We would also damage their radars. We will also damage their surface to air missile systems. Now, as I say, surface to air missile systems, most of them are mobile, some are transportable, they keep moving, they can keep changing position. So it is not a confirmed, or say a given, it is like a given dictat that we have achieved some a complete superiority of air, because any point, anywhere, a SAM system would pop up and it would threaten your control of air. So it is a dynamic scenario, and in Air Force, any Air Force in the world would first plan to take control of complete air. So, to the audience who would not understand the armed forces terminologies completely, but also our interest are very keen and they understand few things, I would give an example from the perspective of the recent movie Top Gun. So, if you see the Top Gun, that particular mission which was planned, they first launch their tomahawks to engage the airfield, and then they would pursue with the mission. So that is basically how things go. To first process with an air attack, you need to destroy the enemy's response to the that is enemy's air defense. So first priority, since I've explained that first priority would be to establish control of air. Now, once we have established control of air, then we would depend. That is a dynamic situation on how many days. Maybe on the very first day itself, we would be establishing complete control of air, or maybe it would take, depending on the resistance, it would take a few days. Once the control of air is established, now the number of missions which are specifically dedicated to air to ground start taking effect. Now, depending on also now the priority of the targets now are decided as per requirements of the joint authority, who is at the top level, sitting and taking decisions on how to paralyze the uh, enemy capability. Now, since now these operations and targets start prioritizing the support to the army strike corps, now at the headquarter level, they demand from all the field units, say from every different strike corps, within the strike corps also, the smaller units and smaller squadrons who are actually fighting in the small battlefield level, they will send the requirements to the corps headquarter, and from corps it will come to the air force rep, who is actually managing at the highest level. So when it comes there, depending on the priority of the targets, these priorities are sorted, and then the allotment of targets is started. Now, once the allotment is started, those allotment now goes to the Air Force strike squadrons, and then these strike squadrons plan the strikes and start executing these strike. So it is an subsequent stage of after the war breaks out at a fair stage, wherein that the ground support operations or air to ground operations will start. Now, that would be to Army Strike Corps or Naval Task Force, whichever way it works out. That is a scenario, that particular scenario that will be built on how much of control of air that we have achieved.
Okay, that's insightful. Just a follow-up question on this, basically. So in joint operations, as I mean, like as people lot more in the civilian segment do not have such an experience. I had a brief experience when we were on basically field in basically the European side, but a lot people like you and me who have never experienced basically what is a field life, or how the actually the operations happen in the real time. So this question is mainly from those that perspective for the people or the experts or the research scholars to basically understand this. So in joint operations, whose requirement actually drives weapon selection? The service that owns the platform, or the service that owns the mission?
So, so to answer this question, I would like to tell you that this weapon selection is primarily done by the unit who is planning the mission and who is executing it, the pilot. That is the in this case it would be definitely the Air Force, because Air Force, through their through their years of experience, have built their understanding, their experience on how to match the target with the weapon, which weapon would exactly engage which kind of target. Of course, they would take generic reference from the army. Say, for example, army gives us a coordinate and request us to engage this particular target. But then we would also, the Air Force would require assistance from army, as in what kind of target that is. What is the type of target? Is it a factory? It is a building, or is it a open area where concentration of troops is there, enemy troops? Now, having known what kind of target it is, now the selection is uh, is at the command level, or say the planning or execution level of Air Force. Say every army corps, there is a command of the Air Force who is fighting. So at command level, there is a small group which is planning and executing the strikes. Now, this group who is in that particular AOR, where they are responsible and they are allotting the missions, they sit and they analyze the target. They know if this particular target is there. We have Air Force has this kind of weapons. Say, for example, it is an open field where there is concentration of troops. So one bomb which has higher amount of explosive and which would produce higher amounts of shrapnel and engage the troops on a higher level. Similarly, if it is a concrete, a higher penetration bomb would be required. So that planning at the last level, and because now this planning and this selection of weapon is essentially done by the air force group or say air force headquarter. This is primarily because that headquarter is aware of what kind of weapons are presently available at which place. So, for example, if we even if we decide that we need a say deep penetration bomb against a target which is highly fortified with concrete walls, so even if we are allotting, but that the headquarter would be aware that even if I allot to this one particular frontline squadron or unit which is flying this particular strike aircraft, but they do not have a availability of that particular weapon, so there would be another squadron which is holding that weapon that would be tasked with that mission. So this choice of weapon is definitely done at the air force headquarter level. It is not at the top level but at the one who is the level at which planning is happening, which is the command center of air force. And say
Interesting.
one particular example I will give you. Say for example, how dynamically weapon selection keeps rotating. Now, as I told you the previously that initially the missions that would be flown to will be towards destruction of enemy air defense. So in some case we do send interceptors or offensive counter air packages wherein our aircraft are fully loaded with air-to-air missiles. They cross the border and enter into enemy airspace so as to encourage the enemy to fly out, come out, get airborne, fight, engage in a fight, and destroy the enemy air defense. But then enemy would also know that these forces which are initially coming are to destroy the enemy air defense. So we would not engage them. We would wait and we will wait for the strike aircraft of the enemy to come so that we would directly engage them. So now our air forces have got airborne to engage the enemy, but any enemy is refused to get airborne and fight with us because the enemy also knows that there's no point in fighting with these forces initially because they are just there to shoot the enemy, shoot us down. So what he will wait for our strike aircraft to get airborne and then get engaged, then engage them, engage the strike aircraft. So in such cases, the first package that is going, whose aim is purely to shoot down enemy aircraft, they will definitely additionally carry a one air to ground weapon, which would be very smaller in caliber, and they would enter and they will deliberately engage in any normal ground target. So now once you have engaged a ground target, the enemy is forced to get airborne and engage you. So what this role what we call is intimidation role. So in this case, he's just carried a small caliber, small weapon. He's entered the enemy airspace, even though the enemy has not got airborne and engage, trying to engage because he knows that my aim is purely to shoot down enemy aircraft and destroy your air defense assets. But once he's refused, I drop one bomb, I engage one of the targets, and now he's forced to get airborne. So once he's airborne, I will engage him and I will destroy him. So that way, this is an intimidation rule. So as and then rule progresses, now in the subsequent waves, I would not require to progress this intimidation rule. There, the strike aircraft would be carrying weapons as per the targets that are allotted. Say, for example, it is a railway bridge or say a very important weapon storage area or strategic weapons storage area, any headquarter which is to be engaged. Now, depending on their priority, their importance, I would prefer the Air Force headquarter would prefer to use a instead of a conventional weapon, a very precise weapon or say precision weapon. In this case, say a laser guided bomb would hit very accurately. So these accuracies will help in engaging a very strategically important target. So in that case, the headquarter would understand the seriousness of the target and then allot a weapon depending on precision. Now, of course, they do take as when the priority is given to the army targets and the naval targets, they do take reference and do take assistance from the army or naval expert who is one of the expert who already sits with them in the air force office, and they take reference from him on what kind of target is this, what is the priority and what is the importance of this target. So this once the prioritization is done, this allotment of weapon is done by the air force in a systematic manner depending on the requirement.
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, in general, if you're on field, we always live on moderate to high level threat. We never live
Correct.
in low level threat. I think that's the basic line when you're on the operations. And
Correct.
I would like to just mention some of the hostile territories, which I think where the NATO troops have been also deployed in Africa, like Chad, Djibouti, and all. I mean, Chad is one of those places like where 24/7 NATO troops are there. And I mean, at such places, we had observed the fact, even I think Kosovo, which is in the eastern side of the Europe, conflicting territory again with Serbia. Over there, I think it's quite complex. The roles keep on rotating uh, depending on from where the threat is coming, because it's so basically like I generally say it as a ginger branch, of threats. Like you don't know from where the threats are going to be grown, or from where it's going to come. So over there, I think we had personally experienced that the roles keep on rotating depending on basically how the synchronization between the forces is at that time, basically between the aerial domain and the land warfare systems too. So of course, I mean, like, this is a different topic to get into about the
Correct.
kind of warfare systems. This comes under the warfare systems, not about the weapon selections. But yeah, I just wanted to mention regarding some of the
Right.
hostile territories
And
in the basically
same
out of
the
India
example that
territory.
you're
Yeah,
giving, like in any remote areas of Africa where
yeah,
you have to move in. Now here again, any small force would going in, say even when a helicopter has go to drop troops, first thing he'll do
yes,
is he'll think of control of air. So considering that,
yes,
first question any helicopter pilot who is dropping special forces or army personnel commandos into that area of operation, first he will think, do what is the kind of threat that I'm envisaging? Do the rebels or say ground forces or the enemy forces, do they have any kind of even a shoulder fired manpad which would create a threat for me? So here, as an expert, whichever side I am, this understanding helps me. Like if I'm from the side of the troops who are actually getting inducted, I would think of how to counter a small SAM systems, shoulder fired manpads. And if I'm on the other side, if he's asking me what would the best weapon, so the cheapest and best option would be just purchase of manpads. So here, if even if a small country like say Chad and their ground forces they decide to just purchase SAM systems, a bigger force is now threatened even to send in a big helicopter now because they know that this is a small and lethal platform that could threaten me anytime. And even though you understand the limitation of the system that a manpad would not have a higher vertical range, but a helicopter
yes.
has to come at low levels to drop those forces, so they are always threatened. So if you understand like how knowledge about systems and how one system could threaten other will definitely help and make a huge impact in any scenario which is working out in any condition. It not has to be particularly a large scale war, even a small scale conflicts, these things matter.
Absolutely, yeah, I agree with you on this. Basically, to basically, I would say, to expand on what we just discussed and spoke about. From your perspective, what is the biggest gap between how basically weapons are evaluated on paper and how they perform when they're actually integrated across air, land, and sea? Because I believe the theory and practical is always different, just like a school days.
Very very interesting question, and
Yeah.
there's some very interesting theory that I will tell you. So whenever any say any platform and any weapon is considered, say Air Force during peacetime, those weapons are fired by the Air Force, and through these firings, both conventional, non-conventional, precision laser-guided bombs, and all types of weapons, everyone is trained to fire them. And it is not only about training a pilot; it is also about uh, when you fire, you keep calculating the scores. That is the accuracy that is achieved. So we do have a system on ground. We have a target, and once the weapon is fired, the analysis is done that where you had put the aim, naturally we will select aim at the center of the bullseye. Like for a layman, if you understand, there's a target on which we fire normal target and which we do say fire with an assault rifle. You would have a bullseye and you would have a circles around it wherein you give the numbers or say markings. Similarly, on ground, we also have a target, and once the weapon is fired, the impact where it is achieved. So this analysis is done on where you had aimed and where the weapon has fallen. So now in this impact of weapon, we calculate the distance from the center target, and that is the error that we have actually got on ground with the impact of the weapon. So now with this say particular score, we this data is collected, and on a larger
Yes.
scale, if 1,000 bombs or 1,000 weapons are fired, in this a circular error is calculated, say an average is calculated, and this with this average we come to a point where we know that this particular weapon has an circular error probability of say this percentage or this meters. Like for example, if I fire a 500 kg, 1,000 kg, or
Yes.
1,000 bomb, it would fall within a possibility of say 10 meters or say 50 meters is the CEP. So within 50 meters, I expect this much amount of weapons would fall. I would not go in detail calculation of how things are done, but
Yes.
in layman terms, what I would explain is now with years of experience and peacetime practice, I know that this particular weapon fired from this aircraft gives a result of this much. So say I have it has for example, I say if it has an accuracy of 70%, now 70% of the weapons would fall in that required area, within that required area, and achieve that much of damage. So in my planning process, what I do is, so now I know that say because the error, the accuracy is 70%. So out of 10 bombs that I fire, I expect the 70 out of 10, 7 bombs would definitely engage the target. So if I want that this particular target, after having studied the target, and I'm matching the target with the weapon, I understand that this particular target, say for example a runway would require, for example, 10 bombs for complete destruction. So for me to achieve that 10 bombs would completely hit that target, I would consider 70% of accuracy, and on a higher side I would go ahead and plan with 14 or 15 bombs, so that I know that at least definitely with my accuracy I know that 10 bombs will definitely hit the target. So the calculation starts backwards. So when we talk about how weapons are evaluated, it is the peacetime data that we have, and then in actual case the calculation starts backwards. What is the target? What is the number of weapons that I require to completely destroy this target? Now what
Yes.
are the accuracy of my weapon? Now I cater that accuracy will completely cover the requirement on the of target of weapon on that target. Now once accuracy I have covered, then I come to the platform which is carrying, say an aircraft which is carrying. Now there are also possibilities that the aircraft that have sent may get shot down in the process of going into the enemy territory. So in that case also with the operations, I evaluate that, say for example, say 30% of attrition I take, that 30% of my aircraft would be shot down. So I cater even that, and further go ahead and extend the number of aircraft going and number of weapons being carried into the battlefield. Now, having catered that, then the further analysis goes, and a complete package, because depending on that strike package which is done, the supporting aircraft which would get airborne to assist them would also keep increasing. So that package, complete packaging is done, and for that, for an accurate or say a good planning of weapon from paper to actual on ground, the data peacetime data is important. Catering those peacetime data properly and going backwards, that is from right from the target going backwards towards the planning of the mission, towards the last support aircraft which would get airborne, say refueler, airborne radar, evacs. So planning backwards would help in analyzing or say definition or completion of that complete package which would go and engage the target. So that is how weapons would be evaluated from paper to actually being flown in and fired on ground.
Yes. So I think, in layman terms, they're trying to say the homework is necessary, very
It is
important.
very necessary. It is very necessary.
Definitely, definitely. I think the
You are
execution
always on
always
homework
is.
during peacetime, because when war breaks,
Yes.
all that homework that you have done will
Yes.
help you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's one of the, I would say, uh, what I can say in general, mandatory aspect that you need to basically do it, you know, during the
Correct.
peacetime. That there is no
Correct.
option. There is an
Correct.
option. I think the people who do not do it, I mean, I don't want to say it in that way, but we recently saw what happened in Venezuela, right? I mean, they had
Yes.
so many warnings since past possibly year or two,
Yes.
regarding the United States, and I think, I mean, at least appreciable amount of force they could have stopped, or at least defended their president. But yeah, I mean, that's what happens when you do not do the homework on ground at such a minute level. So yeah, I think we'll be taking a short break now, and we'll be
Yes, sir.
continuing the conversation in the part two of the episode. This was a very interesting conversation. So stay tuned, and please, before moving to the part two of the conversation, listen to the part one very well, because we are setting a foundation for the conversation here. And in the next episode, we'll be basically discussing more about the ground level missions. Yep. Thanks.